We thought it would be quite interesting to look at what garden conservation, especially regarding climate adaptation and adjustment measures and strategy, is doing. Because, as you all know, the topic of climate change is much more present in gardens than it is in architectural heritage. And one of the pioneers in adapting gardens to climate change is the Prussian Palaces and Gardens Foundation. And there, Professor Dr. Michael Rohde serves as the garden director of the PPGF, which stands for Prussian Palaces and Gardens Foundation. Michael Rohde learned about this topic from the ground up, and he completed a gardener's apprenticeship. He was a volunteer at the National Trust, studied landscape conservation, worked as a freelance landscape architect, taught and researched garden history and garden conservation at Leibniz University in Hanover from 1994 to 2004. And now he is not only the garden director of the Prussian Palaces and Gardens Foundation, but also an honorary professor of garden history and garden conservation at the Technical University of Berlin. And he is responsible for the immense garden, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Many problems persist today concerning the preservation of the gardens, and Michael Rohde asked me to give him a hand microphone, so I'll hand it to him now as, symbolically. Yes, dear Paul Berndorf, thank you very much for the invitation. Dear Mr. Mager and dear Mr. Breitling, we already got to know each other a few years ago in Glienicke. Glienicke is also depicted there on the slide at the top, along with the Pfaueninsel and Babelsberg. I am delighted to talk to you for half an hour today about climate adaptation strategies and measures. So in half an hour I will cover 3 topics briefly. I will touch upon the issues, then the efforts and measures, and finally maybe some solutions. So let's start right away with the first image. We are talking about the problems which were already shown by the previous speakers. In particular, weather extremes are important, but also prolonged periods of drought. And sometimes it's necessary to differentiate, for example, between heat reaching 40 degrees Celsius and, of course, the consequences of pests entering the garden. So I'm talking about gardens here, but it's certainly a completely different topic for the inside of the buildings and such. But still they face similar challenges. But in gardens, some pests come, such as the Asian invasive little white butterfly called the box tree moth, which has no natural enemies here and has been eating everything flat for 10 years. And there is nothing that one can do about it. Another invader is the cute little oak jewel beetle, which bores into the bark, and 2 years later the whole oak tree is dead. And here again you can't do anything about it. You can peel off the bark or something, but yeah, it remains a problem. And if you lose about 40 oaks just like that, it's a difficult matter. So John Ruskin was mentioned, and gardens are natural monuments that can be regenerated, and perhaps the only type that can be preserved through ongoing planting in roughly the same green spatial structure. And therefore gardens require daily care, meaning constant and daily maintenance, and this maintenance naturally involves many aspects that must be considered here in order to preserve the historical and artistic significance of a garden. There are many aspects involved, but they can only be explained when showing what is meant. So, for example, a group of trees is not just a group of trees, and a hedge can also have a very special meaning. So there are many topics involved, such as the early phase of landscape gardening, which is sentimentality, or a weeping willow and an urn, and so on, to be able to deduce various things from it. This means that at a particular location I can only replant the weeping willow, so where it was standing before. So garden conservation, as we just heard in the presentation by Dr. Wendland, has had a late and varied development. And it was a clear pioneer in the GDR, in the GDR. Even in the frame of UNESCO and different discussions, the term parks and gardens did not appear immediately. And it was initially referred to as cultural landscapes, and that's why I mentioned it here also, because last year we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention with the Foreign Office. And a beautiful publication was also published. So the main problem remains until today that the perception of gardens as garden art is difficult. This means that not only is the formal design crucial, and it's not just a space where plants grow and turn green again in spring with trees standing there and so on. It has the same claim as a perspective representation in a painting by Da Vinci or similar. That means that there is this artistic shaping or design, and it is very important to carry it into the future. And of course I will also touch upon the relationship of humans with nature. So when I outlined the problems, of course, there were heat waves in the past as well. Or my predecessor, Harry Günther, who was turning 97 now, mentioned something about the Sahara or something similar. And Detlef Kaag, who was also a colleague of Dr. Wendland, who spoke here before today, worked as a research associate in the state administration of Prussian palaces and gardens, and had to conduct an inventory there while simultaneously writing his doctoral thesis on the terraces in Sans Souci. So there were many topics that played a role, but the intensification of extreme weather events is undoubtedly increasing, also in their dimension, and that's why the same scenario repeated itself in October of 2017, which was a record rain year with 200 millimeters of rain in June. So the soil and the trees were completely saturated when a hurricane with wind speeds of 200 kilometers per hour swept over the gardens and flattened the trees. But then we were able to receive additional funds, assistance from Mrs. Grütters, to be more precise, over €1 million, which were also fully utilized. And nowadays we have double or triple the amount of deadwood removal. So tree care is a significant issue, especially regarding traffic, safety obligations, and when presenting what happened here, and we have 14 large parks, Sans Souci being one of them, all the problems accumulate, which shows the challenges that we are facing. So enough with the problems for now, because we all know them. So let's move on to the measures. And in 2007, on the Day of the Environment, we, along with the German Federal Environmental Foundation, called DBU, addressed the issue at Schloss Bellevue, so Castle Bellevue. And Ms. Sabenica from the UNESCO Commission and colleagues from the Palace administration were also involved, and back then the issue wasn't as visible, nor was it in 2014 when we held the International Congress. The publications were always in German and English with about 80 authors, including colleagues from England, France, America, and so on. And we tried to illustrate the problem, and in doing so we were able to win colleagues like Klaus Töpfer, who also spoke about the precautionary principle. And this means that action should be taken when 80% or 70% of the knowledge is available, and then we should proceed accordingly. As a former Federal Minister of Building and former Federal Minister of the Environment, and later as the Environment Minister at the United Nations, he put the topic of gardens into focus, which is, of course, also related to the question of sustainability and sustainable development goals of the United Nations. Back then, we issued the Declaration of Sans Souci in collaboration with ICOMOS International. And we also involved the Federal Environmental Foundation, which has about 500,000 members and is interested in the preservation of historical gardens and cultural landscapes. The DBU funded the entire Congress and the conference. And we also identified the need for research on the one hand, but also said that we must document the measures and scientifically accompany them. This then continued with the initiation of the first research project at the same time. And of course we were not only sat in the office with Paul Berndorf, but also in the famous restaurant Giraffe in the Hansa area. There was also another nice picture, but I couldn't find it anymore, so there's only the picture which you can see here on the slide. So Professor Kuhn then dealt with woody plants, and we managed, thanks to Mr. Berndorf, as the DBU, we thanks to the help of Mr. Berndorf, as the DBU has a new board, and they said that they have their own researchers and we don't need an additional research team. We managed to do it, and however, we were able to make it clear that we needed external expertise, and in this case it was about knowledge of woody plants, and we were able to conduct some helpful studies there as well. So for example today, how do red beech and oak trees decline anyway? We documented that, and we also presented the age of the trees, because the oldest tree in Sans Souci Park is from the 30 Years' War. So these have been important issues that have helped us further, both in shaping nurseries, which we have had, so tree nurseries, which we have had for a long time, but also in terms of the question of cultural substrates that we needed as a starting aid for planting trees. So a very important foundation on which we could continue working, for example, is that we set up test areas with different cultural substrates and also without substrates, where we had 20 measuring devices measuring shoot growth in nanometers, growth rates, and so on. And as you can see, working with trees requires more experiential knowledge, and no one can only assess whether a tree will survive after 5 to 10 years after planting it, and not immediately after planting it. So Finally, we organize an international congress on the topic of historical gardens and society. And I am very grateful to Ms. Constanze Fuhrmann from the Cultural Heritage Protection section at the German Federal Environmental Foundation. And we also had the pleasure to work with a Jonas researcher and together with the Sustainability Institute with Falk Schmidt. And together we managed to get around 80 authors on board, and as I said, from Vancouver to Russia. So to clarify the question, and the central question was not what do doctors say about gardens or what do other departments, other people say, but the question was, do we need a new relationship with nature? Because we no longer have the question of mastering nature as artistically elevated during the Baroque era. So today we can shape nature as we want, with large avenues, with basin structures, and so on. And we no longer have the question of nature as a model for design and landscape gardening. Now we're dealing with other questions. So that means a respectful approach, to the fact that we are part of nature, and the question of what we can learn from nature. Linné once formulated this for the Prussian constitution in 1848. He said that historical gardens simulate education and a sense of beauty and reflect the character of an entire nation. And there's a lot to that. Even the word identification has something to do with gardens. We have also undertaken further research projects such as the Keres projects funded by the Federal Ministry of Education, where we examine buildings as well as gardens. And we're trying to demonstrate vulnerability, but also criticality, and also suggest some solutions. Basically, it was all under the guise of the Munich Security Conference. And however, since we cannot investigate large train stations or airports, for example, we shifted the focus to cultural heritage. When arguing for security and cultural heritage, we cannot constantly close off the parks due to fallen branches and storms. However, that's what we did and what we had to do. Because we had so many fallen branches that we couldn't clear them all correctly and peacefully, and we had to close the parks for several months, which was obviously quite a lot of effort. Of course, this doesn't help much, but it does help to make people understand that we need more help and support, both in terms of manpower, staff, and finances. So we will also show what we are doing to preserve old trees in a better way. And therefore we have a catalog of recommendations that we have discussed with experts. For example, at the Climate Service Center in Hamburg, we had an expert round with about 30 to 40 colleagues from universities and different institutions. And here on the picture you can see Sören Hese from the University of Jena, who's presenting how he represents the drone-based assessment of drought stress in trees. And he actually found that our parks lose 1% of their area regarding trees each year. And if you calculate that, that means 10% in 10 years. This means that the parks are becoming thinner and thinner. And in fact they are, but you don't notice that if you visit a park once in a year. So this is why we need to illustrate it to be able to show it. And therefore we also have quite a bit of presentation in these areas that we want to convey with this research project, which we will conclude at the end of this year. So through the Gardens Specialist Group of the Association of German Castle Administrations, we have provided position papers, not only for the personnel requirements or staff requirements in historical gardens, but also for the emphasis on science and research for the gardens. It is noticeable that even the German castle administrations, which have been dealing with the heritage for about, or with a princely heritage for about 100 years, so this heritage means that the large institutions became state-owned after the First World War through princely abdications, and they are accordingly funded. And the castle administrations are interested in the preservation of cultural heritage that has become museum-like. I think that the term cultural heritage protection is a great one because it is relevant through the German Federal Environmental Foundation, and it also plays a role in this case for gardens. When we talk about science, we mean which scientific staff members work in these castle administrations. So these people have many tasks, and they must develop monument concepts, they must conduct further research constantly, and so on. By research, we mean which projects are necessary. And we have laid out in the paper what research projects we have done in the last 20 years and what is currently necessary. So when you consider how large the garden landscape in Germany is, and also know that most principalities were in the Holy Roman Empire of Germany, and that every small castle has a garden, then you recognize the power that lies in this question of historical cultural landscapes in Germany. And incidentally, many of them are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which is a good image question and also a responsibility for Germany as a country. And over the decades, even almost 100 years, a lot of experiential knowledge has been gained, which could be used accordingly. Now, there are many funding programs being introduced, but in principle, I'm still missing the topic of historical gardens, or more precisely, historical cultural landscape in these funding programs. Even with the Federal Ministry for the Environment, now led by Steffi Lemke, we discussed the question of biodiversity during parliamentary evenings in Berlin. However, we did not manage, maybe also in the coordination with the climate minister Habeck, to include gardens in this. And that's, which I find incredibly important, why moors and forests are in focus. And in green climate protection, we are still talking about the question of CO2 reduction, and we have tried to show with the German Federal Environmental Foundation that the trees in the gardens bind just as much CO2 as forests, meaning approximately 175,000 tons per year. However, different trees bind CO2 differently, such as deciduous trees and conifers, for example, and so on. And even then, it would still be insufficient. However, I firmly believe that after this conference, things will be turned around and we will get a boost for our gardens as cultural heritage. So we have tried to present this politically. And the way you do that is you show a map and say, what is that? I can't see it clearly. And then I would respond, everything that's red used to be trees that are now gone. And then there's a long pause and people think about what this means, why we have tree losses. And I remember in Vienna or Eisenstadt, I can't remember which city, I once discussed the age value with Gesa Hoyasch and Erika Schmidt at a conference and co-authored articles with a conservationist. Of course, today we talk about documentation. We want to try to preserve and present the old stock, and this gains relevance again today. And of course it is difficult to say goodbye to old trees. It is emotionally tough, and that's why you need water. With the invention of the steam engine, we got many cast iron pipes in the parks, and with that we could pump water up the hill. So in Babelsberg we have a landscape with a height of 40 meters, and we have a basin on top where water can be collected so that we not only have fountains but also water supply for the park. And therefore Pückler also boasted that he created the Babelsberg Park and felt better than Linné. But of course both were giants of garden art, and Pückler had the advantage of being able to use the water and bring it there. So here on the map you can see, so all the red pipes are pipes that are broken, meaning that I can't get the water where it needs to be. And so now what we're doing is that we try to carry around the water with wagon transport. And yeah, so now the question is, what should I water? And this is a trick question, because I can hardly replant trees because I can't water them properly. And this is a problem. This has been a problem for years. And that's why we need to call for water engineers and projects to manage the water supply and get 20 million for the water pipes. So 20 million euro. For 5 years, from June to October, we've had a ban on withdrawing water from rivers, which is called processed water. And what does that mean? This means, so is the water really needed there? Apparently not during the winter months, but we have an exception that allows us to take water at night from 10 p.m. to 12, from 10 p.m. to midnight. And then the water is refilled, but it is consumed by midday, so there is still a lack of water. So we try to work with the University of Potsdam to find out what the groundwater modeling looks like, and we accordingly try to say that if we extract groundwater from the parks, we should also have groundwater replenishment. And that is now on a good path, and we have also received funding for that. So finally, I would like to mention a current research project where we are very grateful for the German Federal Environmental Foundation, which is supporting it again. And all German castle administrations are currently trying to present action strategies for their gardens. And here too we have 100 to 150 case studies of what we are doing, and in the spirit of Klaus Töpfer, what we hold to be 80% correct. This is presented, and it is also conveyed what we still need. So what you see here would hopefully be successful. We will complete this in the spring of next year, And next week we have a major congress in Munich, an internal colloquium where we exchange ideas with scientists, and I'll get to the last 5 slides now and then I'll be done. So we have our strategies. We also want to consider technical measures, and I talked about innovative water management with nighttime and drip irrigation and also automation. And we are making great progress there. But we urgently need a scientific monitoring. That means that we need young and well-educated scientists in the castle administrations, and we need resilience, because a solitary tree has a much harder time than a tree in a group or in a stand. So that's just one aspect here. This means we need improved networking, and we are also on the way here, and we need to document knowledge very well. The last points are the solution strategies. So to maybe make it clear what the cultural heritage of gardens actually is. It initially related to art and history, to culture and education, to garden art, science. So it's a long, broad and diverse topic. Secondly, regarding biodiversity, perhaps a much bigger political issue. We have an incredibly high biodiversity, especially in these old gardens where the old structure is preserved. And of course, we work a lot with nature conservation authorities. We also have good public law agreements where we learn from each other and help each other and so on. And we also do conduct projects, for example, on the old meadows where Linné once obtained seeds from Dresden and Hamburg to develop the meadows over decades. So we have the immeasurable values of welfare effects, meaning health, quality of life, dust binding, and tranquility as well. And I can still remember a movie, a film about the gardens, where a gardener was interviewed, and he was sitting there in Charlottenhof, leaning against a tree, and he said, "Yes, and then I saw a school class coming in. They were all loud, and then they became very, very quiet when they entered the garden." And I found it so wonderful that the garden is still a place that has this quality in our metropolises. More than half of the population already lives in metropolises with several million inhabitants. So it's not like here in the beautiful city of Bamberg where you can still experience nature. And finally, the socio-economic values, such as tourism, jobs, how many restaurants settle here just because of these great, beautiful gardens. So yeah, that's a big issue. And we organized the congress called Historical Gardens and Society, built on the foundation of Hans Jonas, as Ingrid Scheuermann mentioned before, who focused on Kant and the future of human life. And I would like to mention the understanding of nature and gardens once again from my teacher at that time, Dieter Hennebohr. He will celebrate his 100th birthday in 2 weeks, but he has already passed away. And I am quite happy that things are happening in the garden monument preservation. If I may say, Dr. Leonie Glauber will fill the position at the State Office for Monument Preservation, and she will also take over the successorship of Dieter Hennebohr at Leibniz University in Hannover. That means, concerning gardens and monument preservations, that we need education, we need care and voices, and more work in the field of science. The topic of water and soil must be taken incredibly seriously, because we've had years where the soil was completely dried out and overheated. So, yes, soil life has died, so we must protect it and improve the soil as best as possible. There are many, many possibilities for that, and we will now improve the biomass cycle. We have mulch, and I have already mentioned the cultural substrates as well, and this all must be observed. This must be documented annually. We want to initiate water management and have good foundations for sustainably ensuring that sufficient water is available. So not luxury irrigation, but sufficient, so enough water. And regarding trees and replantation, we have now focused on self-cultivation, also based on the research of Professor Kuhn, meaning that we take seeds from trees that are already in the area and we raise young plants from them. We have also sent the material to the University of Kassel to clarify the genetic code of these tree species. And the statement is that the trees know the conditions. So one of them might say, I come from Bamberg, where it's sandy and there's little rain. And that's why we must take the seeds from there and not from an area that looks better. For example, from where a tree would say, I come from Franconia, where it always rains and the weather is good. It goes in that direction, but don't ask me how that works. So in any case, we have found that that we promote these tree nurseries there and establish stock, woody plants and areas to see maybe in 10, 15 years at the latest if the development is better. It may also happen that after 7 years the tree says, I can't make it after all. So I'm getting a signal now, so thank you very much for your attention and patience. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Rohde, thank you for the insight into the fascinating topic of garden monument preservation. So let me summarize it like this. Money alone does not save the gardens. We require interdisciplinary research and also more knowledge about it. So I'll give you a fun fact about the one statement regarding the funding projects that was difficult to approve. So it was assumed that everything was already researched. Within the forestry field, all question about trees were considered solved. That means that in this case, even an expert committee, an environmental foundation, was not